Hey, thanks for listening to this episode of History's Greatest Battles. If you enjoy this or any other episode, please subscribe and share it with a friend. You know, it's not really accepted anymore to refer to Europe's Dark Ages as the Dark Ages, a period where intellectual stagnation and cultural paralysis was rampant. Often, I found that people assume that when Rome fell in the West and the Church took over administration and authority, that it was the dogmatic tendencies of the Church that forced Europe into this period of intellectual starvation that we call the Dark Ages. While there definitely was a dogmatic rule, look at the Inquisitions throughout history, not just the famous Spanish Inquisition, but the hunting of anything heretical that might affect authority. In reality, what occurred in the Dark Ages was knowledge that was once in Europe was forgotten. Europe had built a defensive wall, per se, around itself. And while it allowed the power players to maintain their authority, there was a period of horrific stagnation, culturally and intellectually. We can trace the true moment of this conception, this Dark Age conception, to today's battle. Let's experience now the Battle of Constantinople.
Welcome to History's Greatest Battles, Season 1, Episode 43, The Battle of Constantinople, August of 717 to August of 718. Byzantine Christian forces, unknown. Muslim forces, 210,000 soldiers. With the repulsion of the Muslim forces, Europe's Christian stronghold remained intact, unchallenged by any significant Muslim threat for centuries until the 15th century's tide shifted. This triumph, paired with the Frankish victory at Tours, decisively halted Islam's advance, confining its western expansion to the shores of the southern Mediterranean.
For 10 relentless years, from 622 to 632, Muhammad the Prophet strode across the Arabian sands, reshaping the destiny of a people and carving the path of Islam with unwavering conviction. When death finally claimed the Prophet, no clear heir stood before the swelling tide of the faithful, but it was Abu Bakr, his steadfast ally, who was thrust into the role of successor by those closest to the heart of the movement. Abu Bakr's reign was brief, a mere 2 years, but in that short span, he wielded authority resiliently, unifying a nascent empire that threatened to fracture under its own weight. After Abu Bakr's passing, the mantle of caliphate fell upon Omar, a man of iron will, who now stood as both the spiritual and political helm of the burgeoning Islamic empire. For a full decade, Omar commanded the Islamic armies with efficiency, driving their conquests deep into Byzantine lands, across Persia's ancient plains, through Syria's deserts and into the very heart of Egypt, shaping an empire that now reached far beyond the Arabian Peninsula. Under the Caliphate of Othman, the Islamic tide surged even further, washing up against the Atlantic coasts of North Africa and crashing against the eastern mountains of Armenia and Afghanistan. His leadership stretched Islam's grasp to its greatest reach yet. Othman's rule was cut short by an assassin's blade, and with his death, Islam itself was cleaved in two. On one side, the followers of Muhammad's bloodline rallied behind his nephew Ali, giving birth to the Shiite cause. On the other, the power-hungry governor of Syria, Muawiyah, rose, and the Sunni faction was born. Muawiyah, relentless and cunning, seized control and founded the Umayyad dynasty, anchoring his empire in Damascus, where he ruled with an iron fist from 661 to 750. Ensuring the dominance of his lineage over the Islamic world. Muawiyah's gaze fixed on the Christian Byzantine Empire, driven by a singular, ruthless ambition: the fall of Constantinople. The prize was not just the city itself, but divine absolution. Whispers claimed that whoever brought the city to its knees would see their sins washed away. Between 674 and 678, Muslim forces hurled themselves against Constantinople's defenses, surging by land and sea. Yet the city's impregnable double walls stood like a fortress of stone and will, defying every assault. With his forces bloodied and spent, Muawiyah begrudgingly bent to the Byzantine emperor's terms, sending a peace that demanded a humiliating tribute from Damascus to Constantinople each year, a bitter reminder of their defeat. Over the next 3 decades, Islam's armies swept forward, bearing the banner of faith from the far reaches of Spain to the distant frontiers of India. Yet no matter how far they marched, Constantinople, the very gateway to Europe, remained an ever-present temptation. Caliph Walid, a master of preparation, amassed the legions and ships to finally claim Constantinople, but death seized him before he could see the siege begin, leaving his dream unfulfilled. Upon Walid's death, his successor Suleiman wasted no time, unleashing an armada and a host of men toward Constantinople in 717, determined to achieve what his predecessor could not. The Byzantine Empire, beleaguered and weakened by a string of incompetent emperors, had barely recovered from the wounds of past assaults. As the Muslim armies gathered, it was Emperor Anastasius who wore the imperial crown, his reign ill-prepared for the ferocity about to descend upon him. Ascending to the throne in 713, Anastasius scoured his empire for men of strength and skill, desperate to find warriors capable of defending a realm on the brink of total annihilation. Among his ranks was a man of grit and cunning, a general named Conon, though history would remember him as Leo the Isaurian. Despite the title, Leo likely hailed from Syria, not from the Anatolian province of Isauria, modern-day Konya. Leo had served the empire since 705, his loyalty forged in battle, and by 716, he was entrusted with the command of Anatolia, a crucial region standing as the bulwark against the Muslim advance. As Muslim forces surged out of Syria, Leo harried them with guerrilla tactics, wearing down their advance before he turned his sights on the throne itself, wresting it from Anastasius in March 717. Crowned as Leo III, he wasted no time. He fortified the city with provisions for the 500,000 souls within its walls, preparing for the inevitable siege that loomed on the horizon, knowing full well the scale of the challenge before him. Focused, Leo directed the repair and reinforcement of Constantinople's towering double walls, positioning siege engines and deadly weapons to crush any assault from either land or sea. Caliph Suleiman entrusted his brother Muslama with command, unleashing an army of 80,000 soldiers that thundered through Anatolia, their eyes set on the impregnable walls of Constantinople. Muslama's strategy was to suffocate Constantinople from the landward side, while a formidable Muslim fleet cut off all supplies, tightening a naval noose around the city's lifeline. A vast fleet of 1,800 ships, bristling with 80,000 more warriors, sailed under the command of another general, Suleiman, whose name echoed that of the Caliph, but carried its own weight in the annals of this battle. The fleet divided with precision, one arm locking down the Dardanelles, sealing Constantinople from Mediterranean aid, while the other tightened its grip on the Bosporus, cutting off any hope of relief from the Black Sea. In July of 717, Muslama marched his army across the Hellespont, dividing his forces with efficiency. He led the main siege, but sent a detachment to Adrianople to guard against the unpredictable Bulgars, who had sacked Constantinople just 5 years earlier. Muslama wasted no time, launching a ferocious assault on the walls the moment his army arrived, but the city's defenses swatted away his forces with ease, the strength of the fortifications evident from the outset. The failure of his initial attack made one thing clear: a direct assault would only lead to slaughter. Muslama shifted his tactics, ordering his men to dig deep trenches, caging the city, and ensuring none could escape. With the land assault stalled, the true battle shifted to the sea, where the fate of the city would now be decided. General Suleiman, following his orders, stationed a portion of his fleet at the Dardanelles, while leading the rest northward to blockade the Hellespont, tightening the siege from the sea. But as Suleiman's ships neared Constantinople, the waters betrayed them. Unfamiliar and swift currents tangled the leading vessels, sowing chaos in the heart of his fleet. The ever-vigilant Leo seized the moment. With lightning speed, he lowered the massive chain guarding the Golden Horn and unleashed his fleet, striking before the Muslim ships could even form a battle line. Armed with the devastating power of Greek fire, Leo's ships turned the Muslim fleet into a burning graveyard, engulfing vessel after vessel in flame. The surviving ships scattered in retreat, terrified by the inferno. Suleiman, shaken by the ferocity of Leo's assault, dared not risk his remaining ships. One more strike could obliterate his entire naval force. For now, the northern supply route remained open, a vital artery through which the city's defenders could still draw breath. The siege was already faltering, but worse news came from Damascus. Caliph Suleiman had succumbed to a stomach ailment, likely from overindulgence, and in his place rose Omar II, a man far removed from the battlefield and lacking the tactical prowess to salvage the campaign. The siege ground on for months in a bleak stalemate, the monotony of war and starvation weighing on both sides as the bitter standoff dragged on into the winter. But fate had yet more cruelty in store for the Muslim forces that winter. The winter of 717 through 718 descended with a vengeance. Colder than any in living memory, snow blanketed the ground for over 3 brutal months, a white shroud choking the land. For the men accustomed to the Arabian and Egyptian deserts, unaccustomed to the biting cold, it was a nightmare. Discomfort quickly turned to despair and then to death as the harsh climate exacted its toll. With supply lines frozen and delayed by the merciless weather, starvation and sickness ravaged the Muslim camp. Thousands of soldiers succumbed to the elements, their bodies littering the frozen ground in silent testament to their suffering. Spring of 718 was meant to bring hope for the Muslim army. A new fleet from Egypt, bolstered by 50,000 fresh reinforcements, was poised to reignite the campaign. Under the cover of night, 400 ships from Egypt slipped past the Byzantine fleet guarding the Golden Horn, avoiding confrontation and establishing a menacing presence at the Hellespont, poised to tighten the siege's grip. With the supply routes severed, Constantinople's fate seemed sealed. Yet, once more, Leo's navy emerged to shatter the encroaching noose, turning the tide of battle. Leo's victory was hastened by an unexpected windfall. Large numbers of Coptic Christians aboard the Egyptian fleet, forced into service, defected en masse, further crippling the Muslim war effort. Seizing this moment of disarray, Leo struck in June with a sudden, vicious attack. The Muslim fleet, caught entirely off guard, was thrown into chaos. The infernal Greek fire roared to life once again, unleashing both destruction and terror. The remaining Christian crews abandoned their post, flocking to Leo's side in droves, leaving the Muslim fleet up in flames. With the northern blockade crushed, Leo followed his triumph with a swift, deadly strike across the Sea of Marmara, where Muslim forces on the Asian shore were decimated before they could react. The attack hit like a hammer blow, catching the defenders completely off guard. Thousands were slaughtered where they stood, their defenses crumbling in the face of Leo's ruthless onslaught. Leo, who was as cunning in diplomacy as he was fierce in battle, dispatched envoys to the Bulgar king Tervel. His words convinced Tervel to strike the Muslim forces from the west, turning a potential adversary into a brutal ally. In July, Tervel's Bulgar warriors swept down, smashing through the Muslim holding force near Adrianople and delivering a devastating blow to Muslama's rear. By the time their fury was spent, 22,000 Muslim soldiers lay dead. As if Tervel's onslaught wasn't enough, a new rumor spread through the Muslim ranks. The Franks, feared for their military prowess, were said to be marching across Europe to join their Christian brethren in defense of Constantinople. Though the Muslims had never faced the Franks in battle, they had heard tales of their strength, and those stories now fanned the flames of fear within their ranks. The specter of a Frankish army, combined with the relentless Bulgarian assault, was too much for Caliph Omar to bear. On August the 15th of 718, he ordered Muslama to withdraw, and the battered Muslim army finally retreated from the shadow of Constantinople's indomitable walls. Among the enduring enigmas of the ancient world is the fearsome substance known as Greek fire, a weapon whose secrets have remained locked away for centuries. Though its origins trace back to the time of Archimedes in the Peloponnesian War, Greek fire surfaced sporadically across 1,000 years of naval and siege warfare, striking terror whenever its flames appeared. Guarded jealously by those who wielded its power, the recipe for Greek fire has never been uncovered. Despite centuries of warfare, no leak, no record, not even a fragment of its formula has survived to reveal its mysteries to modern scholars. Perhaps the most insightful analysis of Greek fire resides in Edward Gibbon's monumental work, The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, Volume 6. Quote, "The historian who presumes to analyze this extraordinary composition should suspect his own ignorance and that of his Byzantine guides, so prone to the marvelous, so careless, and in this instance, so jealous of the truth. From their obscure and perhaps fallacious hints, it should seem that the principal ingredient of the Greek fire was the naphtha, or liquid bitumen, a light, tenacious, and inflammable oil which springs from the earth and catches fire as soon as it comes in contact with the air. The naphtha was mingled, I know not by what methods or in what proportions, with sulfur, and with the pitch that it extracted from evergreen firs. From this mixture, which produced a thick smoke and a loud explosion, proceeded a fierce and obstinate flame, which not only rose in perpendicular ascent, but likewise burnt with equal vehemence in descent or lateral progress. Instead of being extinguished, it was nourished and quickened by the element of water, and sand, urine, or vinegar were the only remedies that could damp the fury of this powerful agent, which was justly denominated by the Greeks the liquid or the maritime fire. For the annoyance of the enemy, it was employed with equal effect by land and sea, in battles or in sieges. It was hurled from the ramparts in great boilers, or launched in red-hot balls of stone and iron, or wrapped around arrows twisted with flax and tow, deeply soaked in the deadly, inflammable oil. Sometimes it was delivered through instruments of ever greater vengeance, blasted through long copper tubes mounted on the prows of war galleys, fashioned into the terrifying jaws of monstrous beasts, spewing liquid flame that consumed all in its path." End quote. This fearsome art was guarded in Constantinople as the empire's most precious secret. The galleys and artillery might sometimes be shared with Rome's allies, but the composition of Greek fire was hidden behind walls of secrecy, protected with fanatical vigilance. And the terror it spread among enemies was magnified by their utter ignorance of its nature, each encounter a deadly surprise. In Constantine's book, The Administration of the Empire, the royal author laid out careful strategies to deflect the prying curiosity and desperate demands of foreign rulers anxious to uncover its secrets. They were to be told that the secret of Greek fire had been divinely granted by an angel to the first and mightiest Constantine, with the holy command that this gift of heaven, this unique blessing of Rome, should never be shared with any foreign nation. That both prince and subject were bound by sacred silence under the threat of the most severe temporal and spiritual punishment for treason and sacrilege, and that any impious attempt to uncover its secrets would unleash the swift and supernatural wrath of the Christian God. Through these precautions, the secret remained confined to the Romans of the East for over 4 centuries. And even by the end of the 11th century, the Pisans, masters of every sea and art, could only endure the deadly effects of Greek fire, never grasping its true composition. The defeat at Constantinople was Islam's first great catastrophe, a devastating blow unlike anything their armies had faced before. Though they had suffered defeats in isolated battles, never had they endured such a crushing, all-encompassing disaster. Out of the 210,000 soldiers who embarked on this monumental campaign by land and sea, a mere 30,000 were said to have survived to see their homeland once more. Of the 2,000 ships that once sailed for Constantinople, only 5 were said to have limped home, the rest swallowed by fire and sea. Had Muslama's forces breached Constantinople's defenses, the road into Eastern Europe would have been left wide open, unguarded and ripe for conquest. Until the Muslim armies encountered the forces of Western Europe, there would have been little organized resistance capable of stemming the tide of their advance. Constantinople, the very heart of political, religious, and economic power in the Christian East, would likely have transformed into the new center of Islam, altering the course of history. The Eastern Orthodox Church might have vanished from history entirely, its eradication rippling through Eastern Europe and Russia with unimaginable consequences for future generations. Naval supremacy would have fallen entirely into Muslim hands, for no European power could muster a navy of any significance. None would arise until the Vikings roamed the seas nearly a century later. Even the Frankish triumph at Troyes 15 years later might not have reversed Islam's ascendancy, leaving it poised to dominate Europe and, by extension, the world. As history unfolded, Islam's power remained formidable but distant, its reach curbed by Constantinople's survival. The rapid spread of Islam across Byzantine lands in the Middle East rattled both the emperors and religious leaders, as countless subjects welcomed Islamic rule with open arms. Byzantine rule, notorious for its crushing taxes and the rigid imposition of orthodox dogma, alienated many of its subjects. In contrast, Islam at the time offered a more tolerant and appealing alternative. Its taxes, though imposed on non-Muslims, were far lighter than the burdens demanded by Constantinople. Yet the spread of Islam posed an existential threat, forcing the Orthodox Church to make uneasy concessions, reshaping itself in an attempt to appeal to Muslim sensibilities. This shift crystallized in the rise of iconoclasm, a dramatic rejection of religious images and icons in worship, a direct response to Islamic influence. Islam's prohibition against visual representations of life, seen as an affront to God's sole power as creator, left its mark on Christian practices. For a time, the Orthodox Church followed suit, banning icons, a move that deepened the rift with the Roman Catholic Church and sowed discord within Christendom. In Europe, where literacy was scarce, the Roman Church relied heavily on icons to communicate faith and teachings to the masses. The rivalry between the twin pillars of Christendom, Rome and Constantinople, only grew fiercer with this new theological divide, further straining their fragile relationship. It wasn't until the fires of the Crusades in the 12th century that these two factions would reluctantly find themselves on the same side in a shared struggle. Constantinople's victory did more than stave off Islam. It sealed Europe in a cocoon, shielding it not only from Islamic influence, but from much of the outside world. While the rich legacy of Hellenistic knowledge flourished across the Middle East and Africa, Europe descended into the Dark Ages, a period of intellectual stagnation and isolation. Europe could defend its borders, but its cultural progress languished, stunted by the walls it had erected around itself. Only with the Crusades and the resurgence of trade with the East did Europe begin to rediscover the knowledge it had lost, laying the groundwork for the Renaissance that would follow centuries later. One can only imagine how different the course of European and world history might have been had Constantinople fallen not in 1453, but in 718.